The morning sun was bright outside the tall glass tower, but inside the lobby, the air felt heavy. Employees walked quickly across the marble floor, their shoes clicking nervously. Everyone knew that today was an important day. The powerful Arab billionaire, Sheikh Karim Al-Hassan, had come to the city for a business deal that could change the future of the company. People had whispered about him for weeks, about his wealth, his influence, and most of all, his temper. Karim was a man who never liked to wait. He had grown up in the deserts of Arabia, where life was tough and time was respected. He had built his empire on discipline and control, and he expected the same from others. When he walked into a room, silence often followed, not only because of his authority, but also because of the cold fire in his eyes. This morning, Karim had arrived early for his meeting, but the staff who were supposed to greet him were late. He had been kept waiting for more than 20 minutes, and no one had dared to explain why. That insult was more than enough to light the fire of his anger. He stood tall in the center of the lobby, his tailored suit sharp against the polished floor, his expression dark with frustration. His hands clenched at his sides as he muttered, under his breath, in Arabic. The receptionist tried to smile, but her voice shook as she offered him coffee. He brushed it aside with a wave of his hand, his silence louder than any shout. The staff watched him carefully, stealing glances while pretending to work. They whispered to each other, afraid that if the deal was ruined, their jobs would be at risk. Some even thought about hiding in the back offices until he left. No one wanted to be near him when his anger finally exploded. Karim turned toward the exit doors. His mind was already made up. If they cannot respect my time, they cannot respect my partnership, he thought bitterly. His steps were strong and fast, echoing across the hall like a warning. To him, walking away was better than being treated with carelessness. Near the edge of the lobby, where the shine of the marble faded into the quiet corners, a man was working silently. Samuel, the janitor, pushed his old cleaning cart across the floor. His uniform was plain, his shoes worn out, and his face carried the lines of long days and hard nights. Most people in the building hardly noticed him. He was like the background, always, there but never seen. Samuel had been working since early morning. He had cleaned the elevators, wiped the glass doors, and polished the handles. He moved with patience, never rushing, never complaining. The world rarely paid attention to him, but he carried himself with quiet dignity. He had heard the rumors about the visiting billionaire. He had seen the nervous faces of the staff, and though he did not fully understand their fear, he sensed the storm that Karim brought with him. Samuel believed every man, no matter how rich or poor, carried a story, and sometimes the angriest faces hid the deepest wounds. But at that moment, Samuel was just a janitor on duty. His hands were busy, his eyes lowered, his mind quiet. He was sweeping near the wide staircase when he heard the sharp footsteps of the billionaire moving toward the door. The room felt tense, like everyone was holding their breath. The billionaire was leaving. The deal was slipping away. The staff stood frozen, unable to stop him, too afraid to speak. Samuel, unaware of the exact importance of the moment, bent down to adjust the mop handle on his cart. His hand slipped, and the wooden stick fell to the ground with a loud crack. The sound echoed across the marble lobby like thunder in a silent sky. Every head turned. Even Karim stopped. His eyes narrowed as he spun toward the sound. The janitor stood there awkwardly, holding the mop, his dark skin glowing faintly under the bright lobby lights. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Karim's lips moved sharply, muttering in Arabic words of annoyance. No one else in the room understood what he said, but the language rolled out with a mixture of anger and pride. He expected silence in return, as always, but something happened that no one expected. Samuel lifted his head. His eyes, calm but steady, met the furious gaze of the billionaire. And then, in smooth, fluent Arabic, He spoke softly. "I am sorry, sir. The handle slipped. Please forgive the noise." The words were gentle, but the effect was powerful. Kareem's steps stopped at once. His eyes widened, his face stiffened, and for the first time since entering the building, he did not look angry. He looked shocked. The lobby fell into deeper silence. The staff stared at the janitor as if he had just spoken magic. The billionaire, frozen in his tracks, could not move. His anger, sharp as a blade, had been cut away by something unexpected. The voice of a man no one had noticed before, speaking his language with respect and grace. In that moment, the storm in the lobby changed. The fury of a billionaire and the humility of a janitor had collided, and nothing would be the same after this. The lobby had never been so silent. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the tall Arab billionaire who had suddenly stopped walking, and on the janitor who had dared to speak to him in perfect Arabic. It was as if the world had paused, holding its breath. Kareem al-Hassan's chest rose and fell slowly. For years he had traveled to foreign lands, spoken in his native tongue only with family or close friends, and never once had he expected a janitor in a Western skyscraper to understand him. But the words Samuel spoke were not just correct. They were smooth, respectful, and carried a depth that Kareem had not heard in a long time. For a few seconds, Kareem said nothing. He only stared at Samuel, his sharp eyes searching the man's face. The janitor did not look away. His expression was calm, humble, but also steady, as though he was not afraid of being seen. Finally, Kareem's voice came, low but clear. "You speak Arabic?" Samuel nodded. "Yes, sir. I studied it many years ago." The staff standing nearby exchanged confused looks. Their mouths hung slightly open as though they could not believe what they had just heard. This was the same janitor they passed every morning without greeting, the same man they sometimes ignored when he asked for space to clean. And yet here he was, speaking to a billionaire in his own language, with the fluency of a scholar. Kareem tilted his head, his anger slowly cooling into curiosity. His hands, which had been clenched tightly moments before, relaxed at his sides. "Where did you learn?" he asked in Arabic, his voice carrying more softness now. Samuel lowered his eyes for a moment before answering. "In Cairo, sir. I was given a scholarship when I was young. I studied language and history there." The words struck Kareem like an unexpected wind. Cairo, his own city, his own homeland. The thought of this quiet janitor once walking the same streets, studying the same culture, stirred something inside him. But Kareem was not the only one surprised. The employees standing near the front desk could hardly process what they were hearing. To them, Samuel was simply the janitor, a man who worked late nights, swept the floors, and carried trash bags out the back door. None of them had ever imagined that he carried such knowledge inside him. For years, Samuel had been invisible. People passed by him without noticing his face. Some said a quick hello out of politeness. Others did not bother at all. When meetings happened in the grand conference room, Samuel was only there to mop the floors afterward. When celebrations were held, he was not invited. He was there later, sweeping up the confetti. But Samuel never complained. He had grown used to silence. His dignity came not from how others treated him, but from how he carried himself. His eyes always stayed gentle, and his voice never rose in anger. Life had given him difficult roads, but he had learned to walk them with patience. That morning, as he stood before the furious billionaire, Samuel felt no fear. He felt respect, yes, and humility, but also a quiet strength. He knew what it meant to be unseen, and he knew the power of words when spoken with sincerity. Kareem, however, was not a man who easily showed emotions. He straightened his shoulders and asked again, still in Arabic, "Why are you working here? With your knowledge, with your language? Why are you pushing a cart and carrying a mop?" The question was sharp, almost like an accusation. Some staff members shifted nervously, worried that Kareem was about to insult the janitor. But Samuel only smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth rising with a trace of sadness. "Life is not always a straight path, sir," Samuel said quietly. "Dreams can be broken. Opportunities can disappear. But even when the world does not see you, you must keep your dignity. That is why I work. It may be humble work, but it is honest." Those words hung in the air like a soft echo. Even those who did not understand Arabic felt the weight of Samuel's tone. His voice carried no shame. It carried truth. Kareem's eyes softened further, though he tried to hide it. For the first time since he had stepped into the building, his anger was gone. He was listening, not as a billionaire above others, but as a man facing another man. The receptionist, who had been frozen behind her desk, whispered to a colleague, "Did you know he could speak Arabic?" The colleague shook his head in disbelief. "I didn't even know he went to school. I thought he was just, a cleaner." That word just echoed in Samuel's life every day. Just a cleaner. Just a worker. To others, his worth was measured by his uniform. But now, in this moment, the one man who had the power to dismiss the whole company stood still, frozen not by anger, but by respect. Kareem finally took a deep breath. He looked around the lobby, at the nervous staff, at the shining floor, and then back at Samuel. His mind, which had been full of fury and thoughts of leaving, was now filled with questions. "Tell me," he said, his voice low but firm, "what happened after Cairo? How did you end up here?" Samuel hesitated. He was not used to people asking about his life. For years he had carried his story in silence, hidden like a locked chest. But the look in Kareem's eyes told him this man truly wanted to know. Still, Samuel answered with care. "That is a long story, sir. One of loss and change and survival. Perhaps another time." Kareem nodded slowly, his sharp gaze never leaving the janitor. For the first time in a long while, the billionaire felt something he did not often allow himself to feel: respect for a stranger. The staff continued to stare in silence. They did not understand the words, but they understood the change in the air. The storm that had filled the lobby when Kareem entered had shifted. The fury was gone, replaced by something none of them expected, the beginning of a strange connection between two men who, by all appearances, should never have spoken at all. The lobby remained silent after Samuel's soft words. The billionaire, Sheikh Kareem al-Hassan, stood still as though he had been struck by an invisible force. His anger, sharp as a sword only moments ago, now hung in the air without direction. For years, Kareem had traveled to countless countries. He had met presidents, business leaders, and kings. People feared his temper, respected his wealth, and obeyed his commands. Yet here, in a foreign city's glass tower, it was not a powerful man who had silenced him. It was a janitor, a man in a faded uniform holding a mop. Kareem's mind raced. The janitor's Arabic was not broken or clumsy. It was clear, respectful, almost poetic. He spoke as though the language lived in his bones. Kareem remembered the streets of Cairo, the teachers of his youth, the long nights studying sacred verses and history. Somehow, this man carried that same knowledge, hidden beneath his humble role. The staff still did not understand the exchange, but they felt the change. They whispered behind the reception desk, glancing nervously between the billionaire and the janitor. Some of them hoped Kareem's mood had softened, while others feared his temper might explode again at any second. Kareem stepped closer to Samuel, his eyes narrowing as he studied him. "What is your name?" he asked in Arabic. "Samuel," the janitor replied simply. His voice did not shake. His hands rested on the mop handle, steady as stone. Samuel, Kareem repeated, tasting the name slowly. It was not an Arabic name, but there was strength in it. You studied in Cairo. Then what happened? How did a man like you come to this place, cleaning floors for people who do not even look at you? The staff could not understand the words, but they saw the intensity in Kareem's face. The receptionist whispered to her co-worker, "What's he saying?" The co-worker only shook his head. "I don't know, but he doesn't look angry anymore. He looks curious." Samuel hesitated. He did not usually share his story. Most people never asked, and those who did rarely cared enough to listen. But Kareem's gaze was sharp, demanding truth, yet also carrying something Samuel had not seen before: genuine interest. Finally, Samuel spoke. His words were calm, but they carried the weight of years. "I studied hard. I wanted to become a teacher, but life does not always follow our plans. My father passed away. My family needed me. I left Cairo and came here, hoping to find work. At first, I thought it would only be temporary. But time passed. 1 year became 2, then 10. And here I am." Kareem listened, his face unreadable. Something inside him shifted as he heard those words. He thought of his own past, of the hardships he rarely spoke of the brother he had lost, of the nights when loneliness was his only companion. Wealth had not erased his wounds, only hidden them under gold and power. Samuel looked down at his mop, then back up at Kareem. "It is not the life I dreamed of," he admitted. "But work is work. Dignity is not in the job. It is in the man." Those words struck Kareem deeply. For a moment, he said nothing. He only stared at Samuel as though seeing him not as a janitor, not as a worker, but as a man of wisdom. The lobby doors slid open as a group of late employees rushed inside. They froze when they saw the scene. Kareem standing face to face with the janitor, the entire lobby watching in silence. None of them dared to speak. Kareem finally broke the silence. He asked in Arabic, his voice lower now, almost thoughtful, "Do they treat you well here?" Samuel gave a small shrug. "They do not treat me badly, but they do not see me either. To them, I am invisible." Invisible. The word hung in Kareem's mind like a heavy stone. He had lived a life surrounded by people, assistants, advisors, guards, businessmen, but often he too had felt invisible, not as a man, but as a human being. People saw his wealth, his title, his power. Few saw his heart, and now this janitor had spoken the word that mirrored his own hidden loneliness. For the first time that morning, Kareem's expression softened. His shoulders lowered and his sharp eyes lost their fire. He looked around the lobby, the nervous staff, the polished floor, the shining glass walls, and then back at Samuel, who stood steady, quiet, unshaken. The billionaire took a slow breath. "Samuel," he said firmly, "you and I will speak again. Not here, not now, but soon." The staff gasped quietly. They had never seen Kareem speak to anyone with such calm authority, especially not a janitor. Samuel bowed his head slightly, not out of fear but out of respect. "As you wish, sir." Kareem turned toward the elevators instead of the exit. His anger was gone. The deal that had been moments from collapse was suddenly alive again, though for reasons no one in the lobby could understand. The receptionist finally let out the breath she had been holding. "What just happened?" she whispered. Her co-worker shook his head. "I don't know. But whatever that janitor said, it stopped him." As the elevator doors closed behind Kareem, Samuel quietly picked up his mop again. He did not smile, but his eyes carried a calm light. For once, someone had seen him, not as invisible, but as a man with a story. And though Samuel returned to his cleaning, he knew something had changed. Their paths had crossed in a way that could not be undone. The storm had shifted direction, and the journey of both men was only beginning. The meeting upstairs was supposed to be about numbers, contracts, and future plans. But for Sheikh Karim Al-Hassan, the real meeting had already happened in the lobby. As he sat in the grand conference room surrounded by nervous executives, his mind was not on the business papers in front of him. Instead, it kept returning to the janitor, Samuel, the man who spoke his language with such calm strength. The executives spoke carefully, presenting charts and promises, but Karim's sharp eyes drifted to the window. Outside, the city moved fast, cars rushing, people hurrying, but inside his heart, something slowed. He could still hear Samuel's words. Dignity is not in the job, it is in the man. By the end of the meeting, Karim signed nothing. He gave the leaders only a short promise, "I will think." His tone left them sweating, unsure if they had won or lost. Then he stood, his robe swaying slightly as he walked to the elevator. When the doors opened again into the lobby, every head turned. The staff had expected him to leave the building forever. Instead, he walked slowly, scanning the polished floor, until his eyes found the janitor still at work. Samuel was wiping down the brass handles of the side doors. His back was bent, his movements patient, as though the world around him did not matter. When he sensed a presence, he lifted his head and found the billionaire standing only a few feet away. The staff tensed. No one dared to interrupt. Karim spoke in Arabic, his voice steady but not cold. "Samuel, walk with me." Samuel hesitated for a moment, then nodded. He left his cart by the wall and followed the tall man through the wide glass doors and into the sunlight outside. The city was noisy, but their silence was louder. They walked along the pavement, past busy workers in suits who barely noticed them. To onlookers, it was a strange sight. A billionaire in fine clothes and a janitor in a faded uniform walking side by side. Finally, Karim stopped near a fountain in the square. He turned, his dark eyes fixed on Samuel. "Tell me your story," he said simply. Samuel took a deep breath. He had not shared his full story in years. Most people never asked. But there was something in Karim's tone, something that demanded truth. "I was born in a small town," Samuel began slowly. "Life was not easy, but I was blessed with a chance. A scholarship took me to Cairo. I studied language, culture, and history. I dreamed of teaching, of helping others learn. For a time, I believed my future was bright." Karim listened carefully. He did not move, did not interrupt. "But then," Samuel continued, his voice carrying both pain and calm, "my father fell sick. I had to return home. Money was needed. The scholarship ended. The dream ended. I searched for work in many places, but doors closed. At last, I came here, to this city. I thought it would be temporary, but years passed. Now, this is where I stand." He gestured softly at his uniform, the mop, the simple tools of his life. "It is not the life I planned, but it is honest, and I hold no shame in it." Karim's jaw tightened as he listened. The story was simple, yet it struck deep. He thought of his own brother, lost to illness long ago. He remembered nights when he too had been forced to choose between family and ambition. The memory was a wound that wealth had never healed. "Do you regret it?" Karim asked after a pause. Samuel looked at the flowing water of the fountain. "Regret? Sometimes. I wonder what might have been, but life is not always about what we want. It is about how we carry what we are given. I have learned patience. I have learned silence. I have learned that respect is not given by others. It is carried within." Those words lingered in Karim's heart. For years, people around him had praised him, feared him, or envied him. Few had ever spoken such quiet truth. Kareem's voice softened. You have lost much, Samuel. Yet you stand tall. How? Samuel smiled faintly. Because my father taught me something before he died. He said, a man is not measured by the ground beneath his feet, but by the sky he carries in his heart. I try to remember that. The billionaire lowered his eyes. Those words felt like they had been spoken directly to him. For years, Kareem had carried the weight of power, the loneliness of wealth, the scars of loss. He had built towers of glass and steel, yet inside he often felt hollow. And now, a janitor had reminded him of something he had forgotten, that worth was not built on riches, but on dignity. The square around them buzzed with life, but to Kareem it felt distant. He looked at Samuel not as a janitor, not as an employee, but as a man who had endured, who had wisdom in his silence. You should not be here unseen, Kareem said at last. His voice carried both frustration and respect. You have more inside you than this. Samuel shrugged gently. Perhaps, but life placed me here. And here, too, a man can live with honor. Kareem stared at him for a long moment. He was not a man easily moved, yet he felt a stir in his chest, a mix of admiration and humility. Finally, he said, Samuel, your story is not finished, and I wish to hear more. Samuel lowered his head in respect. If you wish, sir. They stood in silence for a moment, the fountain's water splashing softly between them. The billionaire who had nearly walked away from a deal, and the janitor who had once dreamed of teaching, now stood as equals in the quiet square. It was not the business contracts or polished offices that mattered now. It was the meeting of two lives, two wounds, and two truths. The storm inside Kareem had begun to break. For the first time in years, he felt not like a ruler of empires, but like a man rediscovering his own humanity. The fountain's soft sound filled the silence between the two men. Kareem al-Hassan, the billionaire known for his pride and temper, stood still beside Samuel, the janitor no one had noticed before today. The sunlight reflected in the water, breaking into small ripples, as if echoing the stories they had just shared. Kareem's mind was restless. He had listened to Samuel's journey, how the man had once dreamed of becoming a teacher, how he had studied in Cairo, and how life's cruel turns had pushed him into unseen corners. But what struck Kareem most was not the hardships themselves, but the way Samuel carried them, with calm, with patience, and with dignity. For a long moment, Kareem said nothing. He only looked at the water, his sharp face softened by thought. Then, in a voice lower than before, he spoke. You remind me of someone, Kareem said slowly. Samuel turned his eyes toward him, waiting. My brother, Kareem continued, his gaze distant. He was the gentle one, where I was proud and quick. To anger he was calm. He spoke as you do, with patience, with hope. But he is gone now, taken by illness many years ago. Samuel's eyes softened. I am sorry for your loss, he said quietly. Kareem gave a short nod. He rarely spoke about his brother, not even with close business partners. Wealth and power had surrounded him with walls, but Samuel's words had broken through those walls in a way nothing else had. The billionaire's voice grew heavier. When he died, I buried not only him, but a part of myself. Since then, I have built towers, empires, fortunes. Yet, often in the silence of night, I feel nothing but emptiness. The confession surprised even Kareem himself. He was not a man who revealed weakness, but with Samuel, the words flowed as though they had been waiting for years to escape. Samuel listened without interruption. His calm presence was like an open door, welcoming, unjudging. After a pause, Samuel said gently, Loss leaves a wound that never fully heals. I too have felt it. When my father passed, I felt the ground fall away beneath me. He was my guide, my anchor. Without him, I felt lost. But his words remained with me. And it is those words that keep me standing. Kareem looked at him sharply. What words? Samuel smiled faintly, his eyes remembering. He told me, a man is not broken by loss. He is shaped by it. Carry it, and let it teach you. Kareem's breath caught for a moment. The words rang inside him, heavy and true. For years, he had let his loss turn into anger, into coldness, into pride. But here was a man who had faced the same pain and turned it into quiet strength. The two men stood silently as though sharing not just words but a bond. Around them, the city bustled with life, cars passing, voices shouting, children laughing. Yet the square around the fountain felt like another world, a small space where two wounded souls met. You are stronger than you know, Kareem said at last, his voice carrying respect. To carry such burdens and still speak with calm, it is no small thing. Samuel shook his head. Strength is not mine alone. It comes from faith, from memory, from refusing to let despair win. Every man has pain, but how he wears it, that is his choice. Those words pressed into Kareem's heart. He thought of all the years he had chosen to wear his pain as armor. Coldness, distance, anger. And yet here stood a man who wore his pain as wisdom, even while working in a faded uniform with a mop in his hand. Kareem lowered his gaze. For the first time in a long while, humility filled him. You speak truth, Samuel, he said. More truth than the men in my boardrooms. Samuel smiled gently but said nothing. The silence stretched, but it was not uncomfortable. It was a silence of understanding, of shared wounds. Two men from different worlds, one of wealth, one of labor, had found the same ache inside their hearts. At last, Kareem straightened his shoulders as though making a decision. I will not forget this conversation, he said firmly. You have reminded me of things I buried long ago. Samuel bowed his head slightly. And you, sir, have reminded me that even the powerful carry pain. We are not so different. Kareem studied Samuel's face, the calm eyes, the quiet dignity. A thought stirred in his mind. Perhaps this meeting was not chance. Perhaps it was fate. He turned, his robe brushing against the stone of the fountain. Come, he said. Walk. With me a little more. Samuel followed, their steps slow against the pavement. Strangers passing by still found it strange. A billionaire and a janitor walking side by side. But neither man cared. For Kareem, each step felt lighter, as though a burden had shifted. For Samuel, each step felt meaningful, as though for the first time in years, his voice had truly been heard. They did not speak much more that afternoon, but the silence between them spoke enough. It was the silence of two men who had found in each other a mirror of their own pain. And though the day would end, both knew this was not the end of their story. Something had begun at that fountain. Something rare, something unexpected. A bond built not on wealth or power, not on work or titles, but on shared wounds and the truths that lived beneath them. The city around them buzzed with noise, but for Sheikh Kareem al-Hassan and Samuel, time seemed to slow. The fountain's water sparkled in the afternoon sun, breaking into small, quiet ripples. They walked side by side, not speaking at first, letting the calm of the moment sink into their bones. Kareem had thought he understood strength, patience, and respect. He had commanded armies of employees, negotiated billion-dollar deals, and influenced lives with the sound of his voice. But nothing in his world had prepared him for the quiet power of Samuel, a janitor, a man with humble tools. Yet somehow, He carried authority in a way that wealth could not buy. Kareem finally spoke, his voice low, thoughtful. "You have endured much, Samuel. You have lost, yet you walk with honor. I have lived in luxury, yet I often feel empty. How do you carry such pain without letting it destroy you?" Samuel paused, looking down at his shoes, then back up at Kareem. His dark eyes were calm, steady, carrying decades of experience in surviving life's hardships. "Sir," he said softly, "strength is not in avoiding pain. Strength is in facing it. I cannot change what happened in the past. I cannot undo loss or disappointment, but I can choose how I move forward. I can choose dignity, patience, and truth. That is the power I carry." Kareem's chest tightened. He thought of his empire, his titles, his money. And yet he realized that all of it had never given him what Samuel's words had in that moment: peace. He had always believed power meant control over everything. But control could not heal wounds. Control could not teach humility. Samuel continued, his voice gentle but firm. "I do my work honestly. I speak the truth quietly. I respect others, even if they cannot see me. That is my choice. That is how I live." Kareem's mind raced. For years he had let anger control him, let fear drive him, let pride blind him. He had demanded respect because of wealth and position, but he had never truly understood it. And now this man, standing in worn shoes, holding a mop, speaking softly, was teaching him more than any business school or mentor ever had. The billionaire stopped walking, turning to face Samuel fully. His eyes were sharp, but there was a softness there now, a vulnerability he rarely allowed anyone to see. "You have lived in silence for years, and yet you speak more truth in a few words than many men do in a lifetime. How can a man like you remain humble in the face of such injustice?" Samuel smiled faintly. "Because humility is not weakness, it is strength. Because life does not always reward talent or knowledge or hard work. But life does not break a man who knows his own worth. That is all I know, sir. That is all I carry." Kareem felt something shift inside him. He had seen walls built of marble, towers of steel, and oceans of money, but none of that had made him feel small or proud in the way Samuel's quiet dignity did now. He realized that respect and power were not the same. Wealth could buy obedience, but it could not teach the heart. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years lift slightly. "I have built so much," Kareem said slowly, "yet I have ignored the lessons of life I should have learned. I have demanded respect, but I have never understood it. You show me that it is more than titles, more than money, more than fear." Samuel nodded. "Yes, sir. True respect comes from the heart. True strength comes from within. Titles and money cannot give it to you. Only you can find it." Kareem's hands clenched, not with anger this time, but with realization. The fury he had felt in the lobby earlier that day seemed distant, almost childish. The storm inside him had shifted. Samuel had broken through not with power, but with truth. For a long moment, they stood in silence, watching the fountain ripple. Samuel's eyes were calm, carrying decades of hardship and learning. Kareem's eyes, for the first time in years, reflected understanding, humility, and curiosity. Finally, Kareem spoke, his voice firmer, yet softer than before. "Samuel, I do not know what the future holds, but I want you to know something. You have changed how I see the world. You have reminded me that strength is not in wealth, power is not in fear, and respect is not given. It is earned quietly through honor." Samuel looked at him, his lips curved in a faint, respectful smile. If I have helped you see that, sir, then I am glad. That is all I wish. Kareem's chest swelled with emotion. He had expected the day to be filled with deals, meetings, and perhaps frustration. Instead, he had found wisdom in an unexpected place, in a man who carried the world on his shoulders quietly, without recognition, without wealth, without fear. "Samuel," Kareem said at last, his tone steady and commanding, "I want to hear more of your story. Not now, not here, but soon. I want to understand the man who has taught me more in one afternoon than many years of life have taught me." Samuel bowed his head slightly. "I would be honored, sir." As they began to walk back toward the building, the city around them seemed less noisy, less chaotic. Each step felt purposeful, meaningful, connected. Kareem's mind was clearer, his heart lighter, and for the first time in a long while, he felt hope. Not for business deals, not for wealth, but for life itself. This was more than a meeting. This was a turning point. A billionaire who had nearly walked away in anger had stopped, listened, and learned. And a janitor who had lived in silence and invisibility for years had spoken truth that could not be ignored. In that moment, Samuel's quiet strength and Kareem's newfound humility crossed paths fully, creating a bond that neither man could have expected. And though the world around them continued to move quickly, the change that had begun would ripple far beyond the fountain, far beyond the lobby, far beyond their first conversation. The evening sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold as Sheikh Kareem al-Hassan stood at the entrance of the tower once more. Hours had passed since his first furious arrival. The building that had once felt like a cage of frustration now felt different, almost lighter. And all of it, he knew, was because of one man, the janitor who spoke with dignity. Samuel was back at his cleaning cart, quietly polishing the last corner of the marble floor. His movements were steady, unhurried, as if nothing extraordinary had happened that day. Yet deep inside, he too felt a change. He had never expected a conversation with a stranger, especially a billionaire, to stir the quiet corners of his own heart. Kareem walked toward him, his steps calmer now. The staff, who had been whispering nervously all day, watched with wide eyes. They had never seen their feared guest return more than once. But here he was, heading not toward the executives, not toward the boardroom, but toward the janitor. When Samuel noticed him, he stopped his work and straightened. His uniform was still worn, his shoes still old, but his posture carried quiet pride. Kareem spoke first, his voice steady but warm. "Samuel, I leave tomorrow, but I cannot leave without asking you something." Samuel waited, his eyes calm. "Yes, sir?" Kareem took a deep breath. His words were not easy, for he was a man who rarely asked for help. "I have built towers, companies, fortunes, yet I feel empty inside. You, though life has given you little, you carry peace in your heart. Tell me, how do you live with such strength?" The lobby was quiet. Even those who could not understand Arabic felt the weight of the question. Samuel thought for a moment. Then, in his soft voice, he answered, "I do not live for power, sir. I live for meaning. Some men chase wealth, some chase respect, some chase glory. But meaning is found in small things. The kindness you give, the patience you keep, the dignity you hold, even when no one sees you. Life may take much from you, but if you hold on to these things, you are never truly poor." Kareem lowered his gaze. The words sank into him like seeds into soil. For years he had searched for peace in gold, in land, in control. Yet here was a man who had found peace with far less. "You are wiser than many men I have met," Kareem said at last. Samuel shook his head lightly. "I am not wise. I am simply a man who has learned to listen, to pain, to silence, to others. Perhaps you too can listen, sir. Not to the noise of business, but to the voice inside you that longs for peace. Those words felt like a key turning in a locked door inside Kareem's heart. He realized then that Samuel was not just a janitor, not just a worker with a mop. He was a teacher, though not in the way he had once dreamed. His classroom was the world, his lessons carried in silence until someone cared enough to listen. Kareem placed his hand gently over his chest. "Then I will try to listen." The staff, who had been watching from afar, were astonished. To them, it seemed as though the proud billionaire was bowing, not with his body, but with his heart, to the man they had overlooked for years. Kareem continued, his tone firm now. "Samuel, I want you to work with me. Not as a cleaner, but as an advisor, a man who can remind me of the truths I forget. My wealth builds towers, but your words build men. Walk with me, and together we will do both." Samuel's eyes widened, slightly. The offer was beyond anything he had ever imagined. For a moment he was silent. Then he said softly, "I am honored, sir. If I can serve with truth, I will." A faint smile touched Kareem's lips. It was rare for him, almost hidden, but it was real. "Then it is decided." The staff could hardly believe what they were witnessing. The man they had ignored for years was now being lifted by the very person they feared most. It was as if the world had turned upside down, revealing a lesson none of them could ignore. As the last light of day touched the glass tower, Kareem and Samuel walked out together. Their steps were different but equal, one in fine clothes, the other in a plain uniform. To strangers it might have looked unusual, but to those who had seen the day unfold, it was clear. Two lives had crossed, and neither would ever be the same again. Weeks later, Samuel's life began to change. He no longer pushed the cleaning cart in silence. Instead, he sat beside Kareem in meetings, not to speak of numbers, but to remind him of humanity. His presence calmed the rooms. His words softened the edges of pride and greed. He became the quiet voice that balanced the noise of power, and Kareem, though still strong and commanding, began to change as well. He listened more. He grew patient. He remembered his brother not with only sorrow, but with gratitude. He carried Samuel's words like a compass, guiding him not only in business but in life. Together they traveled to places where Kareem's foundation worked: schools, hospitals, orphanages. There, Samuel spoke with children, reminding them that no dream was wasted, even if the path twisted. Kareem stood beside him, humbled, no longer the man whose wealth defined him, but the man whose heart had been touched by an unexpected friend. The world soon whispered of the strange story, of the furious billionaire who had nearly walked away and the janitor who spoke in a forgotten tongue. But to Kareem and Samuel, it was not a story of wealth or position. It was a story of dignity, loss, respect, and the chance meeting that became a turning point. And so, what began as fury in a lobby ended as friendship at a fountain, and then as a partnership that neither had planned but both had needed. The storm had passed. A new beginning had come.